Hello and welcome to Week 2, Unit 1. I'm glad to be back with you. This week is all about design and design thinking in the context of SAP Fiori. So one thing I'd like to make clear up front, typically the design process is quite collaborative, and what I'm about to share with you is often presented in more of a workshop format where ideally there are team breakout sessions and lots of collaborative processes involved in brainstorming and whiteboarding. However, for the purposes of this course, I'm going to present to you design thinking in a way that allows you to jump right into the process on your own. Just know that in the ideal case, design thinking is quite the team effort. So, before we get too far, let's define design thinking. As you can see here, design thinking is a design methodology all about creating innovation by combining diverse people, creative space, and an iterative approach. The idea is that seemingly complex problems can be addressed effectively if broken down and iterated upon. Ideal solutions and successful products generally have three things in common. They're equally feasible from a technical point of view. The can we do this feasibility circle is sometimes also referred to as the technology circle. They're also viable from a business point of view, so viability is related to business value. And finally, they're desirable and attractive from a human point of view. So the goal is to balance desirability, viability, and feasibility, also known as human, technology, and business aspects of design. So design thinking is meant to be a holistic, outside-in perspective that helps you to understand the goals and the needs of your end users, customers, and other stakeholders in a way that balances these three spheres. And as you'll see more and more, one of the characteristics of design thinking is to rapidly come up with non-coded stories and mock-ups that illustrate ideas and drive conversation. This can help validate solution concepts with end users as well as with technical experts. One last point here. Notice the start here pointed at the desirability. This is on purpose. Because of the three spheres, desirability is often the most overlooked. It's much easier for a technical dev person and a business person to get together and determine what's needed. But don't underestimate how important it is for the actual end user to want what you think they need from the app you're creating. So this leads us straight away into a quick snapshot of how different roles approach app creation from different angles. Try to keep this in perspective and take into consideration the often competing angles. Everyone wants to deliver a great app, even if a developer lead is focused on technical feasibility, whereas a product manager is focused on what's needed for business value. But again, try and think like a designer as much as possible. This is often the forgotten perspective. And remember that it's equally as important to make sure an app feels great and is desirable to use by end users. So let's take a look at a bird's eye view of the design thinking the design thinking process. There's the problem space and the solution space. It's best to start broadly and narrow in the focus later after iteration. Think of the problems you would like to address by creating an app. What are you trying to accomplish? Try to create choices. This is called diverging, so don't hold back in this section. Map out all the problems you can think of related to the scenario you are trying to address. Then make some choices. Weed out the symptoms and converge upon the real problem you want to address. Next is the solution space. Now that you have a problem you're addressing, you diverge. You brainstorm tons of ideas on how to solve for that problem. Take a break and then you come back and converge. That is, you analyze all the solution options you came up with and determine the best one that most effectively addresses the problem identified. So I know this is sounding a bit abstract at this point, but it's important for you to be very aware of this methodology before we go into some specifics. In Unit 3 of this week, we'll go through an example of this process within the context of Fiori. For now, just know that the problem space and the solution space both are equally important and require you to diverge or create choices and then converge or make choices. So here's another view of the design thinking process. Notice the two broad categories represented by the two large circles. It's representative of what we just talked about earlier, the problem space and the solution space. This shows you how much you have to iterate within the process. You often need to go round and round in one space before you're ready to move on to the next space. Meaning, when identifying what you think is the problem you're solving for, you have to do your research. You need to interview all of the relevant stakeholders, most importantly the end users, but also business owners and technical experts. You then need to synthesize your findings, scope out the real problem you're addressing, and then go back and research again with those same stakeholders to see if you're on the right track. As the saying goes, rinse and repeat until you have strong enough validation that you can move on to the solution space. Here, often it can be easy to fall into the trap of assuming you know what you need to build. But remember to diverge first, brainstorm many possible approaches, then create some prototypes, which we'll show you how to do in some upcoming units. Seek validation, refine the solution, and go round the process again. Before you start implementing, make sure you have enough validation. Okay, now to zoom in on some tools and approaches that will be very helpful to you as you go through this design thinking process. One thing you'll want to do is create a persona. Personas are fictional characters based on real data to represent user types. They are extremely useful when considering goals, desires, and limitations of the users, and they really help guide design decisions. Personas put a personal human face on otherwise abstract data about customers. So as you consider the type of app you want to create and the problem you are solving for, ask yourself these questions. What are the characteristics of the users who are going to use this app? What are their tasks on the job? What IT touchpoints do they have? What are their goals in the context of this scenario? What triggers them to even start this scenario? So here's a template to help you get started. You'll be able to download and fill this out later, but for now just know that it really helps the design process if you take into consideration these characteristics of your persona. List out their background, job responsibilities, needs, goals, pain points, stakeholders, competencies, etc., etc. Here's the same template filled out. Now don't worry if you can't see it just now on the screen. You'll be able to download both the empty version and the completed version to review later. Again, just know that it's important to create this profile and let it inform you on the problems and solutions you are considering with your app. So once you have a persona created, the next step is to create a current user experience journey. This is used to achieve a common understanding of the mindset of the user, and it provides a sequence of actions and touch points the user is involved in as part of their journey. For the particular scenario identified, ask the questions. What's on the persona's mind while taking actions on their journey? How do they feel each step of the way? What are the actions and activities they take while trying to achieve their goal? What touch points do they have along this path? So let's look at an example. Here's a persona that loves coffee and has a user experience journey each time he or she goes through the process of getting coffee. Look at the mindset to understand what's top of mind. Things like, I need my coffee. There's a line. How much is this going to cost? Do I want sugar? Do I want a latte or do I want drip? Next, look at the actions taken. The persona has to go to the coffee shop, get in line, look at the menu, make a choice, wait, order, pick up, pay, get condiments, add milk, take coffee. The list goes on. There's so many things involved. Who knew getting coffee had so many actions associated with it? And then lastly, identify all the touch points involved. And sometimes we refer to these as tools or channels or devices or conversations. There's a menu board, there's a barista, there's a cashier, perhaps a mobile device is involved, there's a seating area. Maybe they have their own coffee mug, a loyalty card, things like that. So once the current user experience journey is completed, try and note the pain points and important moments. What are the most important moments? What are the critical decision points? At what point does the user experience come with the most difficulties? In this example, look at the red dots. The user isn't happy by seeing a line again and waiting and realizing he or she is paying €3 for this coffee. The blue dots include the most important points, like the fact that the user always gets a latte, gets the coffee in the same location, and then drinks it. And this may all seem very obvious for this example, but going through this process will help you discover pain points and other important points that may otherwise get overlooked. One thing, if it's difficult to read on the slide, this is often something we do with whiteboards and sticky notes, but I'm just visualizing it here in a way that you'll be able to download later and review in more detail. So, lastly, I wanted to end this unit by quickly highlighting what we like to call brainstorming rules. You'll notice that many of these are for the context of a group setting or a workshop with lots of participants. But I think most are just as relevant when you're just trying to get thoughts straight in your head throughout this process. Build on the ideas you learn from others. Don't judge or assume too quickly, and try to stay focused on a topic before moving to another topic. And especially as part of the divergent processes that we covered, go for quantity and crazy wild ideas. Think of the users, be visual, use stickies or drawings. Remember that the cost associated with failing is much lower in this stage when key decisions about the app have yet to be made. And with that, thank you for your participation today. Next up, in Week 2, Unit 2, we're going to look more specifically at Fiori design principles. Thanks for joining. Hello and welcome to Week 2, Unit 2 of the Build Your Own SAP Fiori App in the Cloud course. We're going to be talking about SAP Fiori design guidelines. Now, as you learned in Week 1, SAP first started Fiori as a set of apps, and then it evolved into the new user experience for all of SAP systems. So we're going to review the Fiori principles, which should be the basis for you creating your own Fiori app. So here they are: role-based, delightful, simple, responsive, and coherent. Now, what's interesting to note is that these 5 principles are stable and independent of whatever technology or actual visual designs are used in the creation of a Fiori app. Those aspects are also important, and we'll be covering them later, but it's important to note that Fiori as a philosophy or a design concept really always adheres to these five principles. So let's go through them one by one. Role-based. Every user has multiple roles depending on their responsibilities. So I might be a cash manager with certain financial tasks. I might also be need to do some purchasing. I may manage people and have HR duties, and so on and so forth. So I, as a person, might have 3 or 4 roles, and each role may require accessing a different system for a different task. So subsequently, each task should be an app designed for how that particular experience needs to play out in my day-to-day role. So what's important here is that each Fiori app is designed for the needs of the user in question for the task that they're trying to accomplish in the role that they're fulfilling in that moment. Now, the historical or classical SAP UX had one screen with hundreds of options and lots of tabs, and it was designed for multiple users. And any one user acting in a particular role would be required to hunt for the necessary fields or find which tab to go to for their part of the process, and would have to get used to ignoring everything else on the screen and get the appropriate training to know where they need to navigate for what they're trying to accomplish. But now, in the Fiori paradigm, role-based means that the single screen with tons of fields is broken down into many separate independent apps, with each app representing a task that a particular person needs to accomplish when in a particular role doing their day-to-day activities. So logically, this leads to a much simpler experience, more intuitive, something that is easy to use without requiring a lot of training, because what you see is what you get. What you see on the screen is exactly what you need as a user functioning in that particular role. You no longer have to figure out which 90% of the fields or whatever percentage of those fields you need to ignore while finding the 10% that are relevant for your particular role and tasks. The next Fiori principle is coherent. All Fiori apps speak the same language and adhere to established best practices. So what this means is that After you use your first Fiori app, pretend you've never heard of Fiori, you've never used a Fiori app. The first Fiori app should be super easy to use, but after you use that first one, the second one will be even easier because you will have already been used to the experience that is Fiori. So things will be located in the same locations. The navigation is similar. There's just a coherence throughout the whole process of using any Fiori app that is hard to describe as a user, but that you just intuitively know and feel on a regular basis once you get used to using Fiori apps. So when you create your Fiori app, it's important that it follows the same coherence and has things positioned in the same way so that users don't get confused and see that something's off. So again, in alignment with the goal of simplicity, SAP has ensured that all new Fiori apps speak this same language, and any apps that you create should try to do the same. The next principle is hard to quantify, but nonetheless still very important to address. It's delightfulness or delightful. So what does this mean? What we like to think this means is that every Fiori app should be enjoyable for users. It should really help make them better at their job and build an emotional connection. Think of your favorite consumer apps that you have loaded on your iPhone or Android device and that you use regularly when you're doing your daily activities. There's no reason that for work activities, the same sort of connection and delightful experience, that same experience should exist for what you do at work, just like for what you do with those other apps for play. So the important thing is that it's not just a tool. It's actually an experience that you connect with that helps you accomplish things that are important to you. And finally, responsive or adaptive. Now, this principle kind of refers to three different things at once. The first is that it automatically, any Fiori app automatically adjusts for the screen real estate available, the screen size. So if you have a mobile phone, a tablet, or a desktop, it doesn't matter. The Fiori app is designed to work equally as well on any of these screens and shows the appropriate layout based on the screen real estate available. So you can accomplish the same tasks regardless of if you're on the go or if you're at your desk. It also supports, all Fiori apps support multiple interactions, so touch or keyboard and mouse. It's the same app in either case, but it intuitively works with either input device. And then thirdly, it works the same independent of ecosystem or platform. So you can be on a Windows computer, an iOS device, an Android device, a Mac, and the Fiori app will respond and work the same way, and it doesn't really matter what the platform is that you're accessing it from. So these 5 principles we just discussed, they can be kind of thought of as more of the Fiori philosophy or concept, which helps bring to life this beautiful user experience that all Fiori apps need to adhere to. And these 5 principles are very consistent, and this consistency exists regardless of the role or the task involved. Also, there may be some differences in visual design because there are ways to, as we showed earlier, there are ways to change the colors or some other minor things, but overall, these 5 principles will always remain the same across all Fiori apps. But of course, there's more to Fiori than just these 5 principles, and we're going to be talking about that in some of the upcoming units. There's the visual design patterns, there's the information architecture, there's the user interface and the business logic that's sort of baked in behind the scenes as you create your own Fiori app. But we thought it'd be important to review these 5 principles to make sure that you're always adhering to this same level of consistency that all Fiori apps either created by SAP or by you need to adhere to really truly be called Fiori apps. And that leads me to my last point. I just want to highlight briefly what it means to be a Fiori app versus just a Fiori-like app. So it's important to remember that when you're building a Fiori app, you really do need to be compliant to all 5 of these principles. If you just pick 4 out of the 5, a user might not be able to tell what's off, but intuitively it's not going to feel right. It's going to be more of a broken experience, and they're going to have a harder time learning it, and it's going to break that delightful experience that we're trying to go for. So you can sort of think of this as the difference between user interface and user experience. Sometimes the user interface might look the same, so you might have the right patterns or colors or things that are triggers that look very familiar to a user, but the overall experience might be off if the way you've designed it is not adhering to those principles. So with that, we're done with this unit. Next up, we're going to talk about the Fiori decomposition and recomposition process. Thanks for joining. Hello and welcome to Week 2, Unit 3. Now that you have a good handle on the design thinking process and you understand the main design principles that make up the SAP Fiori user experience, it's time to combine those two and those two sets of learnings and talk about the SAP Fiori decomposition and recomposition process. So let's start by talking about transactions versus apps. At the heart of the design principle simple is the idea of shifting from a transaction-based approach to an app-based approach. This means no longer building huge transactions, but instead breaking down required functionalities into simple and user-centric apps. So the question really is, what exactly is the difference between apps and transactions? What exactly can we do during the design process to simplify our applications, but also make them viable enough to meet user and business requirements? Let's dive into this transformation process of going from transactions to apps. Okay, many years ago, when key SAP systems were initially designed, they were primarily architected from a system perspective. That is, there were a bunch of objects, and on top of those objects, a bunch of transactions were created so that any user or group of users could operate these objects with functions like create, delete, view, and so on and so forth. For example, we have a sales order object and a create sales order transaction. This transaction allows the sales order to be created by someone. It can be a sales rep, a sales operation person, a customer service agent, or possibly anyone else in another role. But the user interface is not really optimized for any particular role, even though the user requirements can be dramatically different between roles, companies, and industries. So what you have as a result is the information architecture of the system largely influenced by the back-end architecture. And this often doesn't match up well with any user's real-world tasks. Of course, I should say the UI of SAP's Business Suite has been improved a lot over the years. However, this transaction-based information architecture remains somewhat unchanged. So what this can cause is a lot of people complaining that business IT systems are way too complex. But let's try to get a little more specific. What exactly is the complexity we're talking about? We generally hear of two types of complexity. Sometimes when people say complexity, what they mean to say is they mean information overload on a specific transaction, because the transaction is designed to be used by so many people. And each person may have different information needs, different objectives, and different use contexts. So we often end up with what I'm going to call a mega transaction, meaning that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of fields on the screen trying to satisfy everyone's needs, but in the end frustrating everyone. Take the create sales order transaction again as an example. In reality, sales reps don't want to use this transaction today to create a sales order because of its complexity. They want to spend their time on sales, on building relationships with their customers, rather than figuring out how to enter data into the system. While at the same time, the transaction works pretty well for the back office sales operation guy who perhaps has received a lot of system training. But for a sales representative in the field who, for example, travels to retail stores or talks with customers on a daily basis, would he or she use the transaction you see on the screen to order stuff for his or her customers? Probably not, or at least probably not willingly. So the second type of complexity is when the system offers too many similar transactions to a single user who gets lost with so many very similar, but still different, ways to accomplish the same task. The user quickly can get lost in the sea of options. So as an example, when the Fiori design team originally started the design for a new app for the stock overview scenario, They themselves were actually really confused by so many similar transactions available for the same task. We like to refer to them as MD04, 05, 06, and 07. They're all transactions that look quite the same with only slight differences. In the end, the user task behind each transaction is pretty much the same. It's basically, I want to understand my stock situation, identify the exceptions, and react on them. Users eventually learn the differences between all these apps. So why should we provide so many different transaction UIs and let the user be confused by which one to use? There's actually a really good answer and reason for this, and that's system performance. This scenario, historically, can take a lot of time and is often made to be done as a batch job because it can be costly to show real-time stock information, which otherwise might be the preferred view. So there's a transaction to show a snapshot of the data, and another transaction to show the real-time view of the data, and yet another transaction to show the single material situation, and another transaction to show multiple material situation. Again, from a system design perspective, this all makes sense, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense from an end user perspective. Nowadays, with better systems in place, we really have an opportunity to get rid of all of these performance constraints and refactor information architecture to match real end user tasks. So there you go, history of SAP transactions in a nutshell. Now let's look at the new paradigm, apps. An app is not just a set of features. It is a purpose-built tool to support a persona to complete a task. Persona is another way of saying user type or user group. This purpose-built tool or app can also be used by multiple personas if the user requirements and use contexts are similar or the same. So an app is designed purely from the consumption perspective and should be agnostic to the back-end model, unlike what we were talking about with transactions. Once the design is done, the back-end should do data mapping to the design, not the other way around, which again is historically how it's been done. So now we're ready to see how this ties into the Fiori design principles of role-based and simple. Put another way, you have to ask the question, how granular should your app be? And the answer? It really depends. For the same transaction, if different personas, that is different users, have different information needs, then you should create multiple apps so that each user gets a tailored experience. We call this process the decomposition process because what we're doing is breaking down complex mega transactions into simplified apps. But then there are other cases. In some other cases, where there's a single continuous task, we might want to combine multiple transactions and present them in a single app to support the user to achieve a final outcome only possible by combining two experiences otherwise found in separate transactions. We call this process the composition process, combining multiple similar and related transactions into one single integrated app. So the granularity of each app has to be defined case by case and must be based on the user task analysis. So you should try to forget about the concept of transactions and start the design based on a deep understanding of your users and their needs. You can see how both approaches are valid based on the context and outcome hoped for. And both approaches need to keep in mind the simple Fiori design principle. That is, generally speaking, you want to try and get your scenario to be for one use case of one user that can be accomplished in 3 screens or less. This isn't really a hard and fast rule, but it's strongly recommended to keep things simple, especially when you're first designing Fiori apps. So unlike traditional software, there aren't 2 or more or dozens or hundreds of different scenarios accomplished when the app is started by the user. Picking for a complex set of menus and navigating to the buried fields and screens that somebody might need. Rather, it should be extremely focused and simple, but still accomplish exactly what that user is trying to get done for that particular use case. So now I want to briefly walk you through the create sales order scenario that was designed as one of the original SAP Fiori apps. In this case, the decomposition process was used to break down a complex transaction into multiple mini micro apps. First, the decision was made to focus on the manufacturing industry and a B2B business model. This reflects the most common business requirements from the SAP install base. Later, phone interviews took place with end users. Then there was a brainstorming meeting where the entire process was written out. In this example, there were several roles involved, including the customer buyer, the sales reps, sales operations, warehouse clerk, accounts receivable agent, and others. After this was all mapped out, additional experts and users were leveraged to validate and double-check these scenarios. It was then determined that some tasks were performed by a human being and some others were automated. So all the human tasks had to be identified and given a brief description. What's the purpose of the task? What is the primary persona? Who else are the stakeholders? What's the trigger point of the task? What is the input and output of the task? And what is the context when the user is performing the task? For example, is the user doing this task in his office environment or when he's traveling? Is he doing it alone or while collaborating and discussing with others in a meeting room? The next thing done was grouping of these tasks based on the similarity of the different user requirements. The conclusion was that another app was needed for the sales rep to create sales orders, and the design of this app was to be pretty similar to the app for customer buyers and distributors. But then, for sales operations and customer service agents, the experience turned out to be completely different as compared to sales reps and buyers. Sometimes multiple apps with different designs are needed for different personas who are otherwise interacting with the same transaction. So let's take a quick look at the process SAP used for defining and designing SAP Fiori apps. First, you define the market focus as a boundary. For example, the sales process of an insurance company will be completely different when compared to the sales process of a manufacturing company. So you cannot necessarily design one thing that fits every industry's requirements. Once you have the industry focus defined, engage with end users to understand their business reality. Try to document or understand the organizational structure, who are the stakeholders, and how they collaborate one with another. What do they want to achieve? What tools are they using? And based on these insights, capture more insights and create personas. Next, you should really try to create storyboards of, or a process model which shows at a high level the end-to-end process the particular persona or user will go through to accomplish their task easily and effectively. From these storyboards, then start the app abstraction process for defining the app. What this means is that every scenario relies on certain tasks requiring human input and other tasks that are automated by the systems being leveraged. So as part of defining the app, determine which parts of the experience are covered by human interaction and which parts are covered by the app or system. Next, prioritize what is to be included in the app, or each app if there's more than one that you're creating. And do this by prioritizing based on impact. Try not to recreate the same problem of the mega transaction. So prioritize those tasks and outcomes which are most valuable for a particular outcome, while at the same time trying to avoid otherwise less important features from being in the same app. Once the app or apps are identified, for each app, create a statement like an elevator pitch for a startup business. What's the purpose of the app? Who is the target audience? Why are you going to be successful? What are the differentiators? And at this point, the real fun can begin. You'll get to start mocking up what it will look like, and this is something we're going to be discussing in one of the next units. One final point on this section. From the process outlined here, please don't get the wrong impression that it's long or complicated or it has to be a linear process. It really doesn't have to be. Anyone can take this approach here and the Fiori design principles we've covered earlier and run with it and create some fabulous apps. And that brings us to the end of this unit. Now you know more about why and how SAP Fiori came to be and the approach used by SAP to create Fiori apps. Next up, we'll be discussing mockups and the Fiori prototyping kit. Thanks for joining. Hello and welcome to Week 2, Unit 4, SAP Fiori Prototyping with Mockups. So there's going to be a lot of hands-on and demos in this session, but before we get to that, let me set up what we're talking about and why we're going to go through these hands-on demos. As part of the process of creating and designing a Fiori app, it's best if you can rapidly iterate and make mock-ups of the type of screens and flows that you're considering to put together as part of your created app that you're working on. So we have a number of resources, and you've already seen in some of the previous sessions some of the ways in which you should prepare and start thinking about how to deconstruct and reconstruct the different use cases that make up the scenario that you might be considering for your app that you're creating. So there are a couple of websites I want to show you where you can find Fiori design guidelines and something called the Fiori prototyping kit, which has a lot of useful graphics that you can use to create mock-ups. A third resource I want to touch on briefly is the Fiori Design Best Practices Guide. And this is an excerpt from the Fiori Design Rapid Deployment Solution. And if you remember back from week 1, we have a lot of rapid deployment solutions for Fiori. And in this one, there's a lot of guides that are useful, but we're taking one of those guides out of the RDS and putting it here as part of this Open SAP course so that you don't have to go anywhere special to get access to it. So with that, let me go ahead and jump straight into showing you some of these resources. So let's start with the best practices from the Rapid Deployment Solution. What this is a document that outlines all of the different components that make up a Fiori app in kind of a logical flow in a linear fashion for those of you who like things in this type of documentation. So right now we're looking at the section on the app framework and the full screen versus master detail. These are topics that we'll cover in more detail later, but they're here for your reference if you want to go through and use this sort of as like a checklist to see all of the different things that you should consider when prototyping and creating a Fiori app. And if you go to this section called application types, there's kind of a nice set of screenshots and an overview of different application types that you can create using Fiori. And then there's a section on icon usage, and it shows some examples of different icons and what they're meant to represent. So you have this for your reference for how to create these icons in your headers and footers. And then there's another section on controls, which has even more details on the differences between positive and negative actions and how to accentuate that and what the semantic buttons, what's recommended for implementing those. And really it's just a nice guide that kind of outlines all of the Fiori components when you're designing and creating an app. Now, I should say that this guide is static. It's something that we've taken from the Rapid Deployment Solution and put into the Open SAP course. So I'm going to show you now another resource where there's even more information on the design and create process that goes into the different components that go into that. And you may want to make sure that you check that frequently because it gets updated fairly regularly and it's available publicly. So let's switch to that. If you see here, we're on the experience.sap.com website /Fiori-guidelines. We'll give you this link. You don't need to remember it now, but it's pretty easy to find. This is the Fiori Design Guidelines website, which is kind of a more visual representation of some of what I just showed you in that documented format. And if you scroll through here, it gives you a brief overview of what Fiori is and Fiori Design. And then you have this really nice visual layout of principles, UI overview, grid layout, navigation, animation, all these subtopics where you can learn more about how Fiori handles each of these categories, colors, icons, theming. And the very last one here, prototyping kit, this is what you click on to download the prototyping kit, which I'll show you in just a minute. But I just really want to emphasize that this page gets updated pretty frequently, and if you click on one of these topics like topography, it goes into a subsection that shows you the different types of ways you should implement fonts in a Fiori app, and same goes for animation. It has these examples of which way swipes should happen, and how Fiori has implemented everything to be kind of an intuitive and easy to use sort of method. So let me show you the prototyping kit now. When you download it from this section called prototyping kit, you click here to download it, and it's going to pop open a PowerPoint file that's going to look like this. So this is a PowerPoint file that has a number of slides. It's almost 100 slides with different mock-ups and graphics for you to use in your creation process. So let me just scroll through here and show you a few examples. And you'll notice what it looks like initially is almost like a screenshot of a Fiori app, which is on purpose, but if you actually click on these individual components, you'll see that they're all here to be manipulated. So you can actually put in your own text. You can drag and drop and reorder things. These buttons don't have to be used exactly as they are on the screen. You can replace them with other buttons. There's a section toward the end of this set of slides that has other icons that you can swap out. Even up here, there's a little picture of a person to represent a user, and you can basically change every single component on the page. So this is really nice for the iterative process that is prototyping, because you don't need to start from a blank page or a blank canvas. You have sort of a mock-up of a standard look and feel of a Fiori app, and then you can manipulate it and tweak it in whatever way necessary for your particular process flow or app design. You'll see here, this is the master detail layout. Now in week 3, you'll get more details. There's a session on the anatomy of a Fiori app where you'll get a lot more details on how to go about leveraging different types of Fiori apps and what to consider when thinking of things like the header and the footer and master detail versus full screen. Here's a full screen mock-up, and again you'll see that you can click through and change values on any of these lines or replace different graphics to manipulate it as you need to show your mock-up. And really, this is here for you to browse through at this stage. Don't be scared. There's nothing required at this point of the process. We're going to keep teaching you more as the course goes along, but we wanted to give you access to this resource early on and mention it and kind of walk you through where to find it and what to do with it, so that when the time comes for you to actually start creating mock-ups as part of your final assignment, you'll have the context and the experience of knowing what that means and where to go to start that process. And here's a great example of a contact form. This is something that if your part of your app includes somebody entering in their personal information to be collected and used at some other stage in whatever process flow. And so, again, you can change which fields are included and rename things, but that's in here as well. And you can just scroll through here on your own time and notice all of the other great mock-ups that kind of give you a generic Fiori app to start with that then you can change. And there's even here a launch pad where if you want to create your own button for your Fiori app on the launch pad, you have everything you need to do that as well. And then toward the end, here's a bunch of buttons and predefined colors and sizes for you to pull from if you want to update some of those previous mock-ups that we were looking at. So with that, I'd like to wish you well on your time playing with this prototyping kit. It's a lot of fun, and you'll have more chances in the future to understand when to use which components and in which way to best put these together. But for now, that's the end of this session. Thanks for joining.
Hello again, and welcome to Unit 5 in Week 2 of Build Your Own Fiori App in the Cloud. In this session, I'll try to introduce you to the HANA Cloud Platform. Very briefly, I must say, because there are many other courses and resources about the HANA platform, and we can't cover everything related to this huge offering in just one session. HANA Cloud Platform is SAP in-memory platform as a service, or PaaS. You probably heard about application as a service, software as a service. We're going to hear a lot about Fiori as a service. But platform as a service is a cloud offering that enables you to build, run, and manage different types of online applications. So it's not about one solution. It's a complete offering that enables you to create a variety of any type of applications you want, and to run them in a very safe and reliable environment, as well as to manage them and offer them on a 24/7 capacity. HANA Cloud Platform offers multiple services. Services for development, services for management, database services. If we briefly look at the type of services that the HANA Cloud Platform is offering, we'll see that there are different types. We have standard and services for the development of native HANA applications. We have services that enables us to create mashup applications, applications that runs inside the portal and composed of data from multiple sources. We have a set of services that enables us to renew and mobilize SAP UI through SAP Fiori and SAP mobile platform and the mobile services, and we'll focus on some of those services later. Of course, we have security services, authentication services. We have a very important set of integration services that enables us to connect the HANA Cloud Platform to a variety of other systems, SAP system and non-SAP system, so I can consume and exchange data between systems. I have a set of analytical services. The HANA Cloud Platform is based on the SAP HANA database. So everything that is available there, all the strengths of the HANA database available to you on the HANA Cloud Platform. So we have analytic services. We can have predictive analytics. We have streaming spatial analysis. We can have geospatial analysis. All those services, the great services that we have in the HANA database are offered as part of the HANA Cloud Platform, and more services are being added to this platform all the time. Other services that the platform provide are document services, collaboration services through GEM, as well as many management services. We have a set of application lifecycle services, the ability to save application, create an application repository, and version control. We have monitoring, auditing, tracing services as part of the platform. And the nice thing about it, the platform is managed by SAP. So we are providing it with a high service level agreement. It's available 24/7 with a very high uptime. So you can count on that the platform is going to be available whenever and wherever you might want to use it. We are using this platform mainly to build applications. And there are three main scenarios that I want to share with you. Some of them are going to be part of this course. Some of them are going to be part of other trainings you can have. But the first scenario is to build a new cloud application. Something that does not exist today, something that you want to create that is going to consume data that exists either on-premise or in the cloud, but is going to run in the cloud. So it's a new application, it's going to be available online for consumers, and it's something new that you create. You can also take an existing cloud application and use the HANA Cloud Platform tools to extend that specific application. In this course, we are going to create a new Fiori application in the cloud, and we are also going to learn how to take a Fiori application that was already created and extend that with additional functionality. The third scenario, which is slightly more complex but extremely interesting, is to take an existing on-premise application and extend that with cloud offering. So the platform is not limited only for the creation and extension of cloud application, but you can also take something that runs currently on-premise and enhance it with additional functionality and extend that with functionality from the cloud. This is a slightly more complex scenario, but it's very interesting and is also very, very much relevant for Fiori applications that run on-premise. We cannot cover everything that this platform provides in one course or in one session. So I recommend you to go and try and learn more about this platform. There are many other open SAP courses that are dedicated specifically for the HANA Cloud Platform, and you can spend several weeks learning the bits and bytes and everything related to that. You can now run or look at the introduction to SAP HANA Cloud Platform that was already run several times, and there are also other courses in more advanced topics in HANA. You don't have to go and watch everything there, but if there's a certain topic that you are interested in, you will probably find more information in the existing HANA Cloud Platform courses on OpenSAP site. In this session, I want to focus mainly on some of the HANA Cloud Platform aspects that are relevant for this specific Build Your Own Fiori app in the cloud course. And the first thing is to understand that the platform provides us with connectivity services. When we want to build a Fiori application, that application needs to consume data. The data need to come from somewhere. And the HANA Cloud Platform provides us with a connectivity and different connectivity services in order for me to get the information I need and populate the UI. The first thing that we need to understand is a connector called HANA Cloud Platform, SAP HANA Cloud Connector, sorry. That connector enables me to connect the HANA Cloud Platform to an on-premise SAP system. It creates a VPN connection between the HANA Cloud and an on-premise system, an on-premise SAP system from which I want to consume the data. The focus of this connector is on security because I need to install something on my on-premise system, and the connection is triggered not from the cloud, but from the system, from the on-premise system. We don't want to have a situation in which there is a triggering of connectivity from a cloud system to an on-premise system, because that might be someone trying to hack into my system. So I initiate this connectivity from the on-premise system after setting all kind of security and authentication protocol. I can identify the APIs that I'm going to connect with in the cloud. I can make sure that I have the right certificates in place. So I'm creating a very secure, reverse invoke connectivity between my on-premise system and the HANA Cloud Platform services. So if I want to connect my on-premise system to a Fiori landscape in the cloud, this is one way of doing that. If I want to connect to another cloud system, not necessarily to an SAP ERP system on-premise, we have another set of connectors that enables me to create a connectivity between the HANA Cloud Platform and any other cloud offering. It can be an anonymous connector. It can be a connection that required authentication. We support multiple types of authentication, either single sign-on or other authentication protocols. And with this approach, we can actually connect to an SAP gateway system that is expose services publicly, to Microsoft Azure, to all kind of other services. The security level here is slightly less than what we have with the HANA Cloud Connector, but it's still sufficient to provide me with whatever I need for my business applications. Another very important service that the HANA Cloud Platform provides is federated security management. We need to remember, when we build a Fiori solution, we have a launchpad with multiple applications. Some of them connect to an ERP backend. Some of them connect to a CRM backend. Some of them might run against a public service that we have in the cloud somewhere else. We need to make sure that we can actually pass the user credential to all the relevant system. So the user needs to log in into the system, enter username and password in the launchpad. Then I need to pass those credentials to the application, to NetWeaver Gateway, to the backend system. If I'm creating other types of application, I also need to pass credential to the HANA database, to other database that I have. So I have multiple places in which I need to make sure I can log in. Because at the end of the day, I'm not running a single application against a single database. I have multiple applications running against multiple backend systems. And the HANA Cloud Platform provides us with a federated security management system, so it can actually create those credentials, pass them between the system. I have an identity management system, and I can integrate with different identity management systems. So I don't need to enter my username and password over and over again, but the platform takes care of that, and we'll talk about it in some of the other session about Fiori, how do we handle security, because it's a very interesting topic. Also, if you want to learn more about Fiori security, in the introduction to SAP Fiori OpenSAP, there's a whole week dedicated only for SAP Fiori security. So the starting point for the HANA Cloud Platform is a landing page that looks exactly like what you see now. Here I can either create a new account, and you will do it in the exercise later, or I can go and learn more about the platform through all kinds of resources, a community, a help file, sample applications. We have lots of resources dedicated to provide information how to log in and use that specific system. Once I log in into the system and I have an account, there are different types of accounts. You will work with what we call a trial account, which is unlimited, but it only allows you to do things in a trial environment. You are not allowed to create content for production. There are other types of accounts that enables you to run production application in different settings. Once you go into your trial account, you will see a dashboard. In that dashboard, you can actually manage your account and manage your HANA Cloud Platform settings. You can trigger services that are part of the system. We have a portal service as part of the system. We have a mobile services as part of the system. We have, of course, the Web IDE as part of the system. So some of the services are there by default. Other services, you need to subscribe to them, because some services might be free. Other services, you might need to pay extra, or you might have to get a subscription in order to use them. In the same cockpit, you can manage your application. You can manage your HANA application. You can start them and stop them and provide all kinds of parameters. You can manage your HTML5 application, and you will do it later in the course. You can create destinations. Destinations are the connectors to other systems. And of course, you can also define trust between system, authentication, all kinds of settings. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of things you can do here which are beyond the scope of that specific session. What I do want to show you is where to create destination. How to create destination is something that you will do later in the exercise. But we have many options around destination, and there you can actually create a connectivity between the HANA Cloud Platform and another system. Once you define a destination, you can actually use the destination when building an application. So when you're going to build a Fiori application, you just need to pick a destination that was already created, or you need to create a destination and then consume it when you create your Fiori application. If you have a destination in the HANA Cloud Platform, it's available to other resources in the platform. So if you want to create other types of application, not necessarily a Fiori, that destination might also be available to other development environment and other types of application. And this is one of the nice things about this platform. We have generic services. So once I define something and once I set something, that resource is available for multiple solutions. I don't need to recreate it over and over again. And one important and interesting offering that is based on the HANA Cloud Platform is the Fiori in the cloud. We have a dedicated session only about Fiori in the cloud, but I just mentioned here that we have several versions. We have the Fiori Demo Cloud Edition, we have the Fiori Trial Edition, and we have a full-blown Fiori in the cloud that is going to be available later this year. All those Fiori editions are based on a launchpad that is part of the HANA Cloud Platform. When you get your account in the HANA Cloud Platform, you can see that one of the available subscriptions you can have is for a Fiori launchpad in the cloud, and that is the base for Fiori as a service offering that we are going to see later this year. Another important thing to remember about the platform is that platform is reliable, it's scalable, and it's very open. So the platform, the good thing about it, since it's in the cloud, you don't need to take care of that. The platform is available 24/7. The uptime is 99.9 at least and more than that, and it's based on any standard. So we're taking care of making sure that the platform is going to be available for you. And in this specific course and in other OpenSAP training on the HANA Cloud Platform, we had thousands of users working on that without any interferences. So rest assured, you can use that specific platform in this course and later if you want to create applications for production. Where do we start? You will have an exercise later creating your own account on the HANA Cloud Platform, you should just go to hanatrial.ondemand.com. There you can actually subscribe, and assuming you don't have an account already. And if you have an account already on the HANA Cloud Platform, you are more than welcome to use it as part of this exercise. Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Lincourt. I'm with SAP, and I've been with the company for almost 15 years now. I'm a senior solution expert in our Global Defense Industry Business Unit, and before joining SAP, I was a maintenance officer in the Canadian Army. And what I want to do today is share with you the application that I built as part of the SAP Fiori UX Design Challenge. And I want to do that in four steps. The first one is to give you a little bit of business context and the way design thinking crept in understanding the user. The second one is how did I go about designing the application, show you the application, and then lastly share with you some lessons learned. I want to introduce Captain Sidney Smith, who's the protagonist in the application that I designed and built. He is the Battalion S3, or the Operations and Training Officer of a helicopter battalion. And he has four basic roles within his day-to-day life at work. He's an employee of the organization. He's also a manager. He manages the training program. But the area that we're going to be concerned about for the application is that he is a pilot. He needs to keep himself current on the helicopter as well as fly training missions. So let's have a look at the business scenario or the business process that is involved in him going flying. So it starts with a mission that needs to be flown. There's some planning involved. There's an aircraft and a crew that's assigned to the mission. The aircraft is prepared. Captain Smith goes and flies the mission, and then when he comes back, he debriefs both from a mission perspective and from a technical perspective what has happened. Now, the application that I designed and built is focused solely on the acceptance of the aircraft. In other words, just before he goes and flies, he has to certify that the aircraft is safe for flight, and then he can go and fly. In order to do that in traditional SAP environment, he would need to use roughly 9 ERP transactions, over 50 SAP GUI screens, and it would take him over an hour to accept the aircraft before the flight, because it's certainly not designed for a pilot. It's designed for maintenance technicians and people in the background that are actually getting the aircraft ready. So let me give you some insight of what he has to do. And I did this as part of the design thinking, is to break down the information that he needs to know in order to sign off. So the first thing is that he looks at the equipment and the technical status. He looks at all of the different measuring points that's associated with the aircraft, from the weight down to bird nest check. He looks at who's going to be flying with them and their qualification. Look at the equipment itself, specifically the weapons that are installed on the helicopter. Look at the interior configuration of the helicopter. Review the flight status. Review all of the permits associated with it, from deviations, waivers, and operational restrictions. Looks at the open work orders that are open on the helicopter from a corrective maintenance perspective, as well as from a preventative maintenance. And then when the pilot is satisfied, they actually sign off using a digital signature to show that they've accepted the aircraft. So this is how I went about doing the design. First of all, I had to familiarize myself with the different types of applications that are typical in the world of Fiori. So I went to the Fiori Guidelines website, and I saw the list, and I looked at each of the different ones, and I honed in on the approval app type, and that was the first step. Then from there, I also looked at existing approval app and looked at the demos that already exist out there. And I came quickly to the realization that that would be a good design. And I noticed that all of the approval apps have a master detail type of look and feel. So then I went back to the Fiori Guidelines website and studied how the master detail apps are designed and some of the tips and tricks that they provide. So what you see here is my initial prototype. I built this in PowerPoint using the SAP Fiori prototyping kit that you also have at your disposal. And what I liked about this is that there was no coding required. I could define the basic layout, the screen flow, and make most of my design decisions around what it would look like. I could make some rapid iterations, move things around, try different things, talk out loud, and then come up with something that essentially ends up being the final application. First, on the left-hand side, the master area, what basic information needed to be there so that the pilot at a glance could see and understand what he's looking at or what they're looking at. Then on the detail side, how to organize the screen in the different tabs, and then you'll recognize really quickly that those are the same ones that I had shown you earlier in the presentation. And I kept that organization because that's the way the pilot thinks. They organize themselves in their mind in those particular areas. And then below each of the tabs are the details associated with that. But I didn't want to overflow with the detail. I wanted to give some basic information, some next level of detail, and give them the ability to then click again if necessary in order to get another level of detail. I also want to share with you an example of the design decisions that I had to make. And there's no better place to start than by the very beginning of the application and how the user uses it. So think of it, how do they start? And in my case, the pilot has to find the helicopter that they're flying. There's 30 helicopters in the unit. The pilot doesn't necessarily know which helicopter they're going to fly, and they often find that out at the last minute. Now there's also 4 flight statuses available. From flight preparation to release to accepted to return. So what I was thinking is the pilot always knows their name. So they could search for their name and then that would bring them to the helicopter that they have assigned. So really quick, really simple. And then as a secondary approach, using the filter to only show the different types of flight statuses. After doing a couple of iterations in the PowerPoint prototyping toolkit, I then proceeded to code the application. I will show you some insight of how that can be done in week 6. So now let's have a look at the final product of the demo I built. I'm now in my SAP Fiori Launchpad, and I'm going to go and accept my aircraft before I go flying. So here's the list of all of the airplanes and more in the unit. I'm not assigned a permanent aircraft, so I'm going to go and search for it by my name and see which one's assigned to me. So it's tail number 7867, and I notice that it's perfectly in good condition technically, and I'm going to review all of the parameters that I need to review before I can accept it. So first thing I do is I look at all of the measurement documents from the weight to the center of gravity and so on to the bird nest check that has been completed. Everything looks good. I then look at who will be on board, myself and Captain Whitaker, and Captain Whitaker is also fully qualified. I look at the weapons loadout, and that matches the mission profile that I've been informed. And then the interior cabin with passenger seating also matches what I've been told the aircraft would look like. Sergeant Hyde prepared the aircraft for me, and if there's any details I can go and have a look. I'm not going to do that now. There's no deviations, waivers, or op restrictions that I need to be aware of for this particular aircraft at this time, and if there were, I could look at the details. There are some maintenance items, but none of them are critical. From the cabin floor drain hole, there's an obstruction. That's not a big deal. The weather forecast for today is nice and sunny. The engine cowling latch and the left gunner window for touch-up paint, nothing critical that prevents me from flying. And again, if I wanted to know more, I would just click here and I get the details. The maintenance plan that are due in the next little while, both at airframe hours, there's 2 checks, and then there's a 120-day check due in 12 days. I'm going to fly for about 2 hours today, and so I'm well within the parameters again. My aircraft is located at the base, and I'm ready to go. So I'll accept it, affix a digital signature. I don't need to put any comments right now. And as you will see, the release status will change to accept. And this is how I accept my aircraft using an SAP Fiori-like application. I think you'll agree that with the SAP Fiori application that I built, it was designed for a pilot first, user first. Significantly simpler and much more coherent than what they would have to use with an SAP GUI. And I hope you will agree that it's significantly more delightful. But what's important that there's 2 things. First of all, it would take them significantly less time to get the job done so they can go and fly. But more importantly, there's a significant less risk of them forgetting something that could have potentially disastrous consequences. I want to leave you with some lessons learned. The first one is, don't start with the existing applications. We tend to want to fine-tune something that already exists in the SAP GUI that was designed for somebody else, totally somebody else in mind. So keep the end user at the center of the equation, and keep them in the back of your mind. Second is, don't reinvent the wheel. Use existing SAP Fiori application as your model, and leverage that, something that already works well and that creates that coherence. And similarly, don't use all of the controls that are at your disposal. We fall in love with their beauty, their replicability, and we tend to overuse things. And then lastly is, don't make the screens too dense. Keep it simple so that very quickly they can decipher what's going on. And if necessary, give them something that's obvious for them to be able to click on and get the next level of detail in the context of what they want to know. So on that note, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you in a few weeks.